My husband died on a rainy Thursday night. At least, that's what everyone told me. The police, the hospital, even the funeral director. I buried him. I cried over his grave. I spent 3 months learning how to live without him. But then, one afternoon, while waiting for a delayed flight at the airport, I looked up from my coffee and saw my dead husband walking through the terminal. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. If you enjoy my storytelling and the kind of stories I create on this channel, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Also, write in the comments what city or country you are listening from. It always warms my spirit to see how many of us there are. And now enjoy the story. My husband's name was Rowan Hale. Rowan had this calm way about him, the kind of person who could walk into a chaotic room and somehow make everything feel quieter. We had been married for 6 years. Not the kind of marriage people brag about on social media, but the kind that felt steady, safe. We lived in a quiet suburb outside the city. Our evenings were simple. Dinner together, Netflix, arguing about what movie to watch, normal life. Until that Thursday night. It was raining hard that evening, one of those cold spring storms where the rain feels heavier than usual. Rowan had stayed late at work. Around 9:15 p.m., I texted him, "Are you heading home soon?" He replied almost immediately, "Yeah, just leaving the office now." That was the last message I ever received from him. At least, that's what I believed at the time. 2 hours later, my phone rang. The number was unknown. I almost ignored it. But something in my chest told me to answer. A man's voice spoke calmly. "Is this Mrs. Hale?" "Yes. I'm Officer Grant with the County Police Department." My stomach dropped. "There's been an accident." The rest of that phone call still feels like a blur. The words didn't make sense at first. Car crash, Highway 17, rain, loss of control, fatal injuries. I remember dropping the phone. I remember my knees hitting the kitchen floor. And I remember screaming. The next few days moved like a strange dream. Hospitals, paperwork, police reports. My parents drove in from another state. Rowan's coworkers sent flowers. People kept hugging me, whispering the same words. "I'm so sorry." The funeral happened 4 days later. Closed casket. The doctors said the injuries were too severe. At the time, that explanation made sense. Now, it terrifies me, because it meant I never actually saw his body. 3 months passed. 3 long, quiet months. The house felt hollow without Rowan. His coffee mug still sat in the cabinet. His jacket hung by the door. Sometimes I would catch myself reaching for my phone to text him. Then reality would crash back down. Grief does strange things to time. Days feel endless. Weeks disappear. Eventually, life begins moving again. Slowly, painfully, but it moves. By the 3rd month, I had started traveling again for work. Just short trips, nothing far. It helped keep my mind busy, helped avoid the silence of the house. That's why I found myself at Harbor Ridge Airport on a Tuesday afternoon, waiting for a delayed flight to Denver. Airports are strange places, everyone rushing somewhere, announcements echoing over loudspeakers, rolling suitcases, crying babies, people saying goodbye. I sat near Gate 24 with a cup of coffee, staring out the window at the runway. My flight was delayed another hour, so I opened my laptop and tried to answer emails. That's when it happened. At first, it was just movement in my peripheral vision. Someone walking through the terminal. Nothing unusual, except something about the way he walked felt familiar. Too familiar. I looked up, and my heart stopped. Because walking past the gate, wearing a dark jacket, rolling a black suitcase behind him, was my dead husband, Rowan, alive. He looked exactly the same. Same height, same messy dark hair, same slight tilt of his shoulders when he walked. For a moment, my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. It felt impossible, like seeing a ghost in daylight. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking. "No," I whispered. But he kept walking, like he had somewhere important to be, like he had never died at all. My heart started pounding. Every instinct in my body screamed to run after him, but my legs wouldn't move. I just stood there, watching my dead husband walk through the airport. Then something even stranger happened. Rowan suddenly stopped walking and turned his head. For one brief second, our eyes met. The moment he saw me, his face changed. Not surprise, not happiness, not shock. Fear. Pure fear. And then he did something that made my blood run cold. He turned around and started running. For a moment, I couldn't move. My brain was still trying to catch up with what my eyes had just seen. My husband, the man whose funeral I had attended, the man whose grave I had cried beside for 3 months, standing 20 feet away in an airport terminal, alive. And then he ran. That's what finally broke the spell. Because ghosts don't run. Dead men don't grab their suitcase and sprint through a crowded airport like they're being chased. But Rowan did. And the second he turned and started running, my legs finally moved. "Rowan!" My voice cracked as I shouted his name. People around me turned their heads. A couple sitting near the gate stared at me like I had just lost my mind. But I didn't care. I pushed past them and started running. "Rowan!" He didn't turn back. If anything, he moved faster. His suitcase wheels rattled loudly across the polished floor as he pushed through the crowd. Travelers jumped aside, confused by the sudden chaos. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I wasn't a fast runner, but adrenaline does strange things to the body. And grief? Grief turns into something else when the impossible suddenly becomes real. It turns into desperation. Rowan cut through a group of passengers waiting in line for coffee. A woman dropped her drink as he rushed past. I followed seconds later, nearly slipping on spilled coffee. "Sorry," I gasped breathlessly. But my eyes never left him, because if I lost sight of him now, I might never find him again. He turned down a long hallway leading toward the international gates. For a second, he glanced back over his shoulder. Our eyes met again, and the expression on his face made my chest tighten. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't regret, it was panic, like a man whose worst nightmare had just come true. Why would Rowan be afraid of me? That question repeated in my mind as I chased him. Because if he was alive, then everything I had believed for the past 3 months was a lie. The accident, the police report, the funeral, someone had staged all of it. But why? Rowan suddenly turned sharply and disappeared around a corner. When I reached the hallway seconds later, I skidded to a stop. Because the hallway split in 2 directions. Left, right. He could have gone either way. My heart raced as I tried to listen over the noise of the airport. Footsteps, rolling luggage, voices. Then I heard it, the sound of suitcase wheels turning quickly around the corner to the right. I ran. My lungs burned now, but I kept moving. The hallway opened into a larger terminal area filled with travelers waiting for international flights. And there he was again, standing near Gate 41, talking to a man in a gray suit. Rowan's back was turned toward me, but the man he was speaking to noticed me immediately. His eyes narrowed, and suddenly Rowan stopped talking. The man in the suit leaned closer to him and whispered something quickly. Rowan turned around and saw me again. For a moment, everything froze. The crowd, the noise, the entire world seemed to pause. We stood there, staring at each other across the terminal. 3 months of grief, colliding with one impossible
"Rowan,"
truth.
I whispered.
He was
This time,
alive.
I didn't shout. I just walked toward him slowly, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any second. His eyes moved around nervously, looking at the people around us, looking at the exits, looking anywhere except directly at me. Then he spoke, but not to me. "Go," he said quietly to the man beside him. The man in the gray suit hesitated, then turned and quickly walked away into the crowd. My stomach twisted. Who was that? Rowan turned back to me, and for the first time since I saw him, he spoke my name. Calla. Hearing his voice after believing he was dead nearly shattered me. Tears immediately filled my eyes. "You're alive," I whispered. He looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept in days. "You shouldn't be here." I stared at him in disbelief. "You died." "I know." My breath caught. Those 2 words felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. "You know?" I said, my voice trembling. "Rowan, I buried you." People nearby were starting to notice us now. A couple standing near the gate watched curiously. Rowan lowered his voice. "We can't talk here." "You're right," I said, anger rising suddenly. "We can't talk here." Because the moment I finished that sentence, 2 security officers started walking toward us. One of them spoke calmly. "Sir, ma'am, we've had reports of someone running through the terminal." Rowan's entire body stiffened. "I was just in a hurry for my flight," he said quickly. The officer nodded slowly. "Can we see your boarding pass?" Rowan reached into his jacket pocket. For the first time since seeing him, I noticed something strange. The name printed on the boarding pass he handed over wasn't Rowan Hale. The officer read the name aloud. "Daniel Mercer?" My heart dropped. Rowan, or Daniel apparently, didn't react. He just nodded. "That's me." The officer glanced briefly at me. "Is there a problem here?" I stared at Rowan. My voice came out almost as a whisper. "That's not his name." Rowan's eyes widened slightly. "Calla." But I didn't stop. "That man is my husband," I told the officer, "and he died 3 months ago." The officer blinked in confusion. "What?" Rowan suddenly stepped closer to me, his voice low. "You need to stop talking." My chest tightened. "Why?" I asked quietly. "Because the man I married is standing right in front of me pretending to be someone else." The officer looked between us, clearly unsure what was happening. "Sir," he said carefully, "I'm going to need you to step aside for a moment." Rowan didn't move. For the first time since I saw him, he looked genuinely afraid. Then he leaned closer to me and whispered something that made my blood run cold. "Calla, if you don't walk away right now, you're going to get both of us killed."
My entire body froze. Killed? Before I could ask another question, Rowan suddenly grabbed his suitcase and did the last thing I expected. He walked straight toward the security officers, raised his hand slightly, and said calmly, "Fine, let's talk." As the officers began escorting him toward the security office, Rowan looked back at me one last time and mouthed two silent words, "I'm sorry." Standing there in the middle of the airport, watching my supposedly dead husband being taken away by security, I realized something terrifying. The accident hadn't been the end of Rowan's story. It had only been the beginning, and whatever he had gotten himself involved in was far bigger than I could imagine.
The security office at the airport felt smaller than it should have. Cold fluorescent lights buzzed above us, a metal desk, 2 chairs, and a quiet tension in the air that made every second feel heavier. Rowan, or Daniel Mercer, according to his boarding pass, sat across from the 2 airport officers. His hands rested calmly on the table, too calmly, like a man who had spent the last 3 months rehearsing this exact moment. I stood near the wall, my arms folded tightly across my chest. My heart was still racing, not just from chasing him through the terminal, but from the terrifying question repeating in my mind. Why would someone fake their own death? One of the officers cleared his throat. "Let's start simple," he said. He slid Rowan's boarding pass across the desk. "This says Daniel Mercer." Then he gestured toward me. "But she claims you're her husband." Rowan exhaled slowly. For the first time since I saw him at the airport, he looked tired. Not physically, emotionally, like the weight of everything was finally catching up with him. He turned toward me. "Calla." My eyes burned with anger. "You don't get to say my name like that," I snapped. 3 months of grief exploded out of me all at once. "I went to your funeral," my voice cracked. "I stood beside your grave." Rowan closed his eyes briefly. "I know." The officer leaned forward. "Sir, we're going to need an explanation." Rowan looked at him, then looked back at me, and finally said the words that shattered the last piece of the life I thought I knew. "The accident was real," he said quietly, "but the body wasn't mine." Silence filled the room. For a moment, none of us spoke. The officer blinked. "What?" Rowan rubbed his hands together slowly. 3 months ago, the crash on Highway 17 did happen." He swallowed. "But I wasn't the one driving." My chest tightened. "Then who was?" Rowan hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "This wasn't an accident," I whispered. His silence confirmed it. The officer's voice hardened. "Mr. Mercer, or whatever your real name is, you're going to explain this right now." Rowan nodded slowly, then leaned back in the chair, and began telling the story I never expected to hear. "About a year ago," he said, "I started working on a financial investigation." My eyebrows furrowed. "You worked in corporate consulting." "That's what I told you." The room spun slightly. Everything I knew about Rowan suddenly felt uncertain. "I wasn't consulting," he continued quietly. "I was helping expose a massive money laundering operation." The officer looked skeptical. "For who?" Rowan paused, then said 2 words that changed everything. "Federal investigators." I stared at him in disbelief. "You're telling me you're, what, some kind of undercover agent?" Rowan shook his head. "Not an agent, an informant." The officer leaned forward. "What organization were you investigating?" Rowan's jaw tightened. "The group moving the money isn't small. They're connected to multiple shell companies, and they don't like people asking questions." My stomach twisted. "So they found out about you?"
Rowan nodded slowly. Yes. And when they did, his voice dropped slightly. They'd tried to kill me. The room felt suddenly colder. The crash? I asked. It wasn't supposed to be an accident. Rowan looked down at the table. They forced another car off the road trying to hit mine, but the other driver lost control first. My chest tightened. Someone else died? Rowan nodded. That's when the investigator stepped in, he continued. They told me I had two choices: disappear or end up in the next grave. I stared at him, struggling to breathe. So you chose to disappear? Rowan's voice was quiet. They staged the crash. The burned car, the closed casket, everything. Tears blurred my vision. You let me believe you were dead. Rowan's expression finally cracked. Pain filled his eyes. They told me it was the only way to keep you safe. My hands trembled. Safe from what? Rowan's voice dropped to a whisper. The people who wanted me gone. The officer leaned back slowly. And now you're traveling under a fake name? Rowan nodded. I was relocating to finish testifying against them. I stared at him. 3 months of grief. 3 months of crying over a grave. 3 months of learning how to live without him. All because of a lie meant to protect me. Why didn't you tell me? I asked quietly. Rowan looked up. His voice broke slightly. Because the moment you knew, you would become a target too. The room fell silent again. For the first time since seeing him, I understood the fear in his eyes at the airport. He hadn't run from me because he didn't care. He ran because seeing me meant the plan had failed. The officer stood up slowly. I'm going to need to make a few calls. He stepped out of the room, leaving just Rowan and me alone, for the first time in 3 months. We sat there quietly. The man I loved, the man I buried, the man who was somehow both real and a stranger at the same time. Finally, Rowan spoke. I never stopped loving you, Calla. My chest tightened. You stopped existing, I said quietly. That's not the same thing. He looked down. I thought it would be temporary, but once the case grew bigger, his voice faded. I wasn't sure if I'd ever come back. Tears rolled down my cheeks. You should have trusted me. Rowan nodded slowly. You're right. The door opened again. The officer returned, and behind him stood 2 people in dark suits, federal agents. One of them looked directly at Rowan. Mr. Hale, she said calmly, we need to move you immediately. She glanced briefly at me. And she's coming with us. My stomach dropped. What? Rowan's eyes widened. No. The agent's expression was firm. She's already seen you alive. That makes her involved now. Within an hour, everything changed again. I was escorted out of the airport through a private exit, placed into a black SUV, and driven somewhere I didn't recognize. Over the next few weeks, I learned the full truth about Rowan's double life. The investigation, the criminal network, the reason he had to disappear. Eventually, the people he helped expose were arrested. The trial lasted months, but in the end, Rowan's testimony destroyed their operation. And for the first time in nearly a year, we were allowed to go home, together. But our life would never be the same again, because some lies, even when told for the right reasons, change everything. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you forgive someone who let you believe they were dead, even if it was to protect you? Or would that kind of betrayal be impossible to forget? Tell me honestly in the comments. And also tell me where you're listening from. Every time I read your stories from different cities and countries around the world, it reminds me how connected we all are. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, because sometimes the most unbelievable stories turn out to be the ones that are true.